Craig? Craig? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Craig Allison. I'm based in the Transportation Research Group up in Boldwood, and I'm part of the Human Factors team there, alongside Rich, who you heard from a couple of minutes ago. My talk today is going to be on eco-driving and fuel use in vehicles as well. So you will hear some things that Rich would have alluded to. I'll try not to repeat too much, but obviously there's going to be some links there. So just to introduce the Human Factors team up in Boldwood, this was taken on a very nice sunny day. But we're quite a large group up there. We're all looking at different aspects of transportation, human factors. We're primarily from a psychology background, but we have computer scientists as part of our team. We have engineers. So we're quite a diverse mix of people. So today I'm going to talk to you about vehicle emissions. Now, when we think about transportation, we can think how it's revolutionised our world. It allows us to move across countries, it allows us to move across continents, we can visit our friends in different countries, it allows me to get to work in the morning. I live in Portsmouth, so there's no way I can walk to work on the average day. One of the issues, however, is that expends energy, and whenever we expend energy, we have the negative side of that. So we need to think about the issues that transportation can have on our environment. You can think of this as the dirty side of our modern world. To put this into perspective, we can think of vehicle emissions as quite a large air quality issue. We're talking a lot in Southampton about the impact of the cruise port. But approximately 8% of the carbon dioxide that we release and that's in our atmosphere is due to transportation. Now that's a huge amount if you think we've only had combustion engines in cars, in trains for about 150 years. So that's a large chunk. And it's not just, of course, carbon dioxide that we're releasing within vehicles, but also some very nasty and highly toxic gases as well. Nitrogen oxides, quite a popular one people talk about. But exposure to these vehicle emissions have a very significant and very negative effect on our well-being and on our health. So it's associated with issues such as asthma, bronchitis, chronic pulmonary disorder, upper respiratory tract infections, all of these sort of respiratory disorders that none of us want. So we need to find ways in which we can reduce the impact of transportation on both our environment and on our health. To think about this in context, we can think how much does transportation relate to the amount of carbon dioxide that we're releasing on an annual basis. Now this is data from the EU in 2012, but transportation is the second highest source of pollutants in the EU currently, after electricity generation. So this is quite a large amount, obviously. And before we can think, oh well, maybe it's just to do with aircraft and shipping and trains, actually when we look at the breakdown, 72% is due to everyday road vehicle usage. So it's the behaviours that people in this room, people in the city, normal everyday folk are doing which are contributing to our large CO2 emissions. So now we need to think, okay, this is quite a big problem. What steps can we do to start to tackle that? Now, that picture was more faded when I put that in. I'm not expecting you to be able to read this slide now. But as Rich alluded to, one of the issues that, one of the approaches we can take forward is looking at this concept of eco-driving. So even though we've had great technological developments over the last 10 or so years looking at developing these more efficient drivetrains, developing hybrid engines, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, natural gas vehicles in some cases, those are not going to revolutionise the world because it takes a long time for those trickle-down effects to occur. The average person cannot just go out and buy a brand new hybrid tomorrow simply because the investment costs. So by developing ways and changing the behaviour of our drivers, every single driver can make a positive impact on their fuel use. One of the good things about trying to encourage eco-driving behaviours is that even though they're associated with lower fuel use, lower vehicle emissions, so largely positive effects, they're not associated with greater increase in journey time. So this isn't just a case of getting drivers to slow down, because obviously we all want to get to our destinations fairly quickly. But rather it's a case of teaching our drivers to drive more intelligently, to make smarter decisions about when to brake, when to remove their foot from the accelerator. If we know drivers are about to slow down because of traffic around a corner, we don't want them wasting the fuel to speed up. And because of this reduced fuel use, because of this benefit to the environment, we're not only doing our bit to help Mother Nature, but we're spending less each week at the petrol station. Now, for people who visit the petrol station fairly often, anytime I don't have to give Shell or Tesco an extra tenner, I'm pretty happy with that. So finding ways which can benefit both us as individuals and the environment, we can achieve that using eco-driving. So how do we go about doing that? How can we teach drivers to drive more efficiently and get them to eco-drive? Well, in many cases, it's just about making sensible decisions when driving. So ensuring that you minimise the vehicle load. You don't need to drive around with a canoe on the car if you're not going canoeing. Removing that excess weight. Trying to avoid unnecessary traffic jams, so if you can travel slightly earlier or slightly later. If you go on the M3 or the M27 on a regular basis, you'll know what those are like during rush hour. Avoiding the use of ancillary vehicle systems that we don't necessarily need. So in the case of air conditioning, it's quite a popular one, where you talk to hypermillers and eco-drivers. They'll be dead against the use of aircon. Personally, I like to be comfortable as well when I'm driving, so we need to ensure a way in which the everyday driver who isn't that concerned about saving the last penny will still get benefit. So how can we teach people to use a little bit of aircon to make sure they're comfortable, but not an excessive amount? The gentle acceleration, the gentle braking, and the coasting behaviours that Rich talked about earlier, of course they make up a massive part of this as well. So the previous work is obviously related to the stuff that Rich has already talked to you about designing more efficient interventions into drivers, developing ways to communicate that information to the drivers. The most effective Rich was talking about, of course, his Haptic Pedal, providing drivers the best point to remove their foot. And this has quite a long established history within the Transportation Research Group. And so we can think, okay, we have that baseline of knowledge now. We have an idea of the sort of interventions we need to do. How can we encourage that to be more effective? And not just be of use to extensive eco-drivers, but to be able to benefit the general public. So that's where the current work that I'm working on really plays in. This is the G-Active project, the Green Adaptive Control for Future Interconnected Vehicles. It's an EPSRC funded project that we're working with in collaboration with Imperial College London and also from colleagues in engineering based in, I say on Highfield, obviously, here as well. And the aim of this is to reduce fuel consumption and to reduce emissions by approximately 5%, which we know from the work that Rich has done looking at his Haptic Pedal and some of the information that Volvo have put out, that should be achievable. But of course we need to not only achieve this goal, but we need to be able to maintain this. So it's no good just in the lab we get people to drop their fuel use if as soon as they go out into the real world they forget all what they've learned. So we want to develop information to go into the vehicle to persuade the drivers. We want to provide the drivers with information about their drivetrain so we know how to make their journey the most efficient it can be. I always think every presentation needs a selfie. So this is just a very quick look at some of the G-Active team. We have colleagues from the Transportation Research Group, from the Imperial College engineering groups, as well as Highfield-based engineers. And we all have a diverse set of skills, we all have diverse backgrounds, be it from computer modelling, be it from my more psychology-based background, traffic modelling. And so it's trying to bring these different skills to all leverage against the problem. So what have we done as part of the project? One of the first things we looked at was starting to record naturalistic driving behaviours. Now this box you see in this picture here is our automated data acquisition module, or ADAM for short, which has 2 stereoscopic cameras in and a small Raspberry Pi device. And we've attached this to drivers' cars, so they drive around in their everyday behaviour, and we just record what they can see out in front of them. So we can use that to judge how far a driver has in front of them, manage headway, what sort of speed do we know drivers like to approach corners, bends, and we can use that to develop early algorithms to make predictions of what would be the most fuel efficient for them. We've also looked at developing simulator trials. We've used a model of a journey around Southampton, and we've plotted the journey in our simulator, we've recreated that, so we can now get drivers to drive around fake Southampton. So we're not only getting them to do small scenario-based where they have to respond to a certain action, but we can get them to drive around a city. And we can see natural curves, how they respond to roundabouts, how they respond to traffic jams. Now, Rich alluded to this method earlier in his presentation, but we've used a tool which is known as cognitive work analysis to really start to map the constraints that occur around the task of eco-driving. Now, cognitive work analysis is based on the work of Rasmussen back from the 1970s, who argued that in order to understand a problem, it's not just a case of knowing the problem itself, but knowing the events that occur around that problem. So we want to know what tools do our drivers have available to them to be able to make decisions, make sensible fuel use decisions. We want to know who has a role to play in this. Is it a case that we only need to target what the driver's doing, or should we also look at making government proposals and policy recommendations about curvature of roads, about quality of roads? We can look at how the drivers can achieve their goals. So there's usually a case that there's not one way in which you can achieve your goal. We can start to map the different options that are available to the driver, and then we can give them prompts to achieve the most fuel-efficient version of that. And finally, we can look at how different levels of expertise, of experience, influence our drivers. So if you're more experienced at driving, if you're more in that eco-driving mindset, what sort of decisions do you make that are different to a learner driver or someone who's newly qualified? And then how can we take those lessons and try and inform down the road to improve the types of lessons that we give our learners to make them more aware of their fuel use? We've also used some design toolkits to try and devise these in-vehicle interfaces which directly interact with our drivers, that can propose greener routes to them, which can alert them to traffic situations, so they can make more sensible fuel use decisions. So, our current and future work that we're doing is developing algorithms to predict future and upcoming fuel needs. We want to integrate this with traffic demands to try and think of how future connected vehicles can influence this. As vehicles can talk to not only the infrastructure, but also to each other, how will that change how we interact, how we drive? We can look at displaying the best recommendations to drivers in order to encourage them to make sensible decisions. And we're looking at empirically testing these designs, these implementations, both on the road using the Transportation Research Group's instrumented vehicle, but also in our simulator where we can put some more dangerous situations in. We can have unexpected events occur in a safe and controlled way. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for listening. If you do have any questions, feel free to talk to me at the end. If not, we have a website dedicated to the project and to the research group. Thank you very much.